would start and saying good afternoon, everyone. And as you see in the title, today we have a very relevant topic to, I think, the focus of NaDiMa, disaster risk management, and the topic is urban planning and resilience and spatial planning. I think everyone knows that resilience is a hot topic in international political and scientific arena to proactively deal with natural disasters and impacts, climate change, and also its associated challenges, as well as unsustainable development pathways, and very relevant to urban planning and urban development. On the other side, we have on the title, on the topic urban planning, an extensive field of theories and practices aiming to improve the quality of cities, places, and also improve human well-being. Therefore, I think we have today two important but relevant questions. First, why resilience is important and how it can be incorporated into urban planning paradigms, structures, and thinking. And second, in turn, how resilient urban planning can capacitate our cities toward long-term resilience and sustainability. As a speaker, I would introduce and welcome Professor Zebardast, full professor of urban planning from the University of Tehran, also my supervisor back in 2008, master supervisor, also part of our German-Iranian partnership, started from 2018 in two projects, INCORE and INCREASE projects. We have Professor Zebardast from University of Tehran. Also in INCREASE project, we are focusing on this topic, urban resilience and spatial planning. Professor Zebardast is a distinguished researcher in both planning and urban planning and regional planning, as well as resilience studies. And I think definitely we get good insights from the presentation and its contents. Without wasting time, I would give the scene to Professor Zebardast, and I think this is clear. We see the topic urban resilience and urban planning and urban resilience, and Professor Zebardast, the scene is yours, please.
Well, thank you very much, Asad and colleagues. I'd like to first thank the organizers of this meeting for giving me the opportunity to speak about urban planning and resilience. As was mentioned, there are two important issues in this presentation, and I'll try to link it to the experiences of urban planning in Iran and try to see what we could do at the end to make our urban areas and our cities more resilient. To give you an introduction, the first question is that why urban resilience is important. You see, urbanization and urban growth is taking place at an unprecedented level. Currently, more than half of the world's population is living in urban areas, in cities, and this figure is going to be about 68% by the year 2050. This means that urbanization and urban growth is an inevitable phenomenon. So urban resilience, because of the fact that urbanization and urban growth are going to continue, is of importance. Another point is that urbanization brings about the climate change. You see that although cities cover less than 3% of the Earth's surface, but it is estimated that 71% of global energy-related carbon emissions comes from the urban areas. So if we take care of our urban areas in terms of resilience, then we might come up with some solutions to these problems, as well as the natural and man-made disasters which occur mostly in urban areas. In the next slide here, you see several disasters that in the past 20 years happened around the world, from Hurricane Katrina to flooding in Germany last year. And you see the figures that if in the next slide, that the number of natural disasters are increasing year by year. Where in nearly 200 natural disasters we had in the year 1980, by the year 2016, they have been about 700. And in terms of economic damages, in the year 2011, 465 billion US dollars were lost because of the damages caused by these natural disasters. In terms of human loss, you see the right and figure. The number of deaths as a result of natural disasters in the past 25 years is increasing. Now, all these call for the attention for the urban areas and also the resilience of urban areas. So the resilience is at the forefront of global policy agendas. You could see it in the Sendai framework, in the Sustainable Development Goals, in the Paris Agreement, and also in the new urban agenda of the UN Habitat. Also at the local level, certain initiatives have been taken place or are taking place by international organizations to make cities and urban areas become more resilient. To mention some, the 100 resilient cities that Rockefeller Foundation is initiating, or the ICLEI, which has adapted a program which includes more than 2,500 cities, or UNISDR's initiation, which includes about 4,250 cities by the year 2019. So given this importance of the urban areas and then the natural disasters that happen, so we go to about disaster resilience and see the definitions that have been given by international organizations and go through them and to see how we could relate it to urban resilience. Well, UNISDR defines resilience as the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate to, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions. Well, this is a general definition which has been presented by an international organization, although there are many other definitions given about disaster resilience, and it seems that there is no consensus about what really disaster resilience should be about. Now, going to urban resilience, we see a lot of definitions are given by a lot of scholars about urban resilience, which I have shown some of them here. And by showing these, I want to say that there's no consensus about the definition of urban resilience as well, the same as in the disaster resilience that was mentioned earlier. One of the definitions of urban resilience, which is put forward by Miro and her colleagues, is this definition, which I think it covers most of the definitions that have been put forward by other scholars. So this would be the definition that I would be using in this paper. Urban resilience in this definition refers to the ability of an urban system. So we will be defining what an urban system is in the next slides, and all its constituent socio-ecological and socio-technical networks across temporal and spatial scales to maintain or rapidly return to desired functions in the face of disturbance, to adapt to change, and to quickly transform systems that limit current or future adaptive capacity. So This definition is chosen because it covers most of the concepts and capacities of resilience that we see in our urban settings. However, as I said, since there is no consensus about the definition of the resilience as well as urban resilience, there might be some challenges about this definition as well. Say, for example, who defines what is a desired function, or who defines, say, for example, the urban system itself, what should be its constituents, and so on. So from city to city, we may have a different view on these definitions. Nevertheless, we have to see the challenges that might be put forward by those who are concerned about the urban resilience. Miro and her colleagues have classified them under 5 W's, and they call them who, what, when, where, and why. And when we look at these 5 W's of urban resilience, which in fact, the work of Miro is the extension of the works by other scholars who have stressed the importance of asking resilience for whom and what to what. So in this definition, resilience is recognized as a desirable state. But as I mentioned, who determines what is desirable and for whom? So urban resilience is shaped by who defines the agenda, whose resilience is being prioritized, and who benefits or loses as a result. We have, in the definition, I've argued building general adaptive capacity over adapting to specific threats by priority areas, sectors, hazards. They will undoubtedly, as I mentioned, would differ from one city to another. Thinking through resilience for when entails whether the focus is on short-term disturbance, such as storms, or long-term stressors, such as climate change. And translating the phrases rapidly return to or quickly transform to the ideal situation in the definition to a particular setting has also the same questions. So resilience for where also refers to the challenges of delineating spatial boundaries. So when we are talking about urban system, whether this urban system covers a city or city and its peripheral areas, or a metropolitan area or a region. So these are the W's, or the 5 W's that we have to cover when we talk about urban resilience. And finally, why is resilience being promoted? And what are the underlying motivations for doing so? So why should we going about the resilience? There are no right or easy answers to these questions, but it is our collective thought that may help us come up with a definition that would be acceptable to what we see, what we say today as urban planning, or urban resilience and urban planning. One of the items that we covered in that definition was urban system. Jabarin says that what makes urban resilience definition so difficult is the inherent complexities of the cities, and that's right. So to make this complex entity a little bit simpler, Miro and her colleagues have put them into 4 interconnected components. Now, these 4 interconnected components, which in these figures we see them, the governance networks, networked material and energy flows, urban infrastructure and form, and socioeconomic dynamics, each of them cover some aspects of urban areas. For example, governance networks refers to the diverse range of actors and institutions whose decisions shape urban system. This includes the level of governments or the states, NGOs, and businesses, consumers, laborers, and so on. And the networked material and energy flows refers to the many materials, the different types of materials that are either produced or consumed in the urban system, such as water, energy, food, and waste flows. Urban infrastructure and forms encompass the built-up area, such as buildings, transportation networks, energy and water grids, utilities, along with urban green space and parks. Excuse me. And finally, the socioeconomic dynamics covers such issues as monetary capital, demographics, and justice, equity, and public health, the livelihood capacities, and so on. So this schematic presentation of urban system emphasizes the interconnections both within and between the 4 complex and adaptive subsystems which we mentioned now. For a comprehensive assessment of urban resilience, these subsystems and their elements need to be considered. From another point, when we look at urban resilience in the context of urban, resilience could be described in the following 3 capacities: absorptive capacity, adaptive capacity, and transformative capacity. I go to their definitions very fast. Absorptive capacity is the capacity of cities and regions to withstand change and bounce back to the previous state, whereas adaptive capacity is the capacity to learn, combine experience and knowledge, adjust responses to changing external drivers and internal processes, and continue operating. And transformative capacity, which is long-term, is capacity to create a fundamentally new system when ecological, economic, or social structure make the existing system untenable. Now, there are, taking these 3 capacities into account, there are many resilience frameworks put forward by scholars to assess the existing or future capacities of resilience capacities of cities or urban or communities. Now, each of them have their own characteristics. Either they are they cover a single hazard or multiple hazards. I have chosen or highlighted the BRIC framework, which is put forward by Qatar in 2010. And I would like to go into the 6 components that Professor Qatar has brought about in her BRIC. BRIC stands for Baseline Resilience Index for Communities. And this framework is composed of 6 components: social resilience, economic resilience, community capital resilience, institutional resilience, housing and infrastructure resilience, and environmental resilience. When we go into the details of these 6 components, we could see that the 4 components that Mira and her colleagues had put forward for defining the urban system, these four interconnected components, as I explained them. Now, these four urban system components could be found or could be accommodated by these six components of brick framework. What I am trying to say is that if we want to analyze the urban system by brick framework, we could cover almost all the items that were mentioned in the four components by the urban system that was put forward by Miro and her colleagues. And now I would like to go to urban planning and governance and see why planning and governance is important. Until now, what I tried to show is why urban resilience is important. Now, I want to show you 3 or 4 slides that urban planning and governance is a central component of global ambitions to build systematic and integrated approaches to grapple with uncertainties in future dynamics, interactions, and consequences of development, natural disasters, and climate change in urban areas. So these 2 items, that is urban governance and planning systems, are also very important for urban resilience. Now, existing mismatch of the governance and planning paradigms leads to exacerbating existing path dependencies, strengthening the business as usual approaches, which some authors think that transformative resilience takes care of these issues. And we would be putting forward in our recommendations the use of transformative resilience for these reasons. Now, another point is that there is a renewed interest from the international organizations on governance and planning. The Sendai framework, which I explained, or the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Habitat 3, they all emphasize improved planning as a basis for a natural disaster reduction. In the new Habitat Agenda, which was approved by many countries in 2016, you see the 5 key guiding principles for new urban agenda, which one of them, that is rethinking on existing planning systems and shifting to adaptive resilience or resilient urban planning, shows that planning system could help move towards resilient urban areas. With this background, I want to go to planning system in Iran and see in Iran at the local level, when we talk about urban planning, what is the current planning system, and is that conducive towards incorporating urban resilience into it, or what should we do to make urban planning more resilient? At the national level in Iran, and also at the regional level, we prepare 2 types of plans. That is the spatial development plan and physical development plans. But when you come into the metropolitan area and also local levels, then we have only 1 type of plan for these areas. Recently, the National Spatial Planning document was approved by the government in 2021, and it puts forward strategic policy making for the other documents in terms of spatial and development aspects. Now, at the local level, which is the focus of our speech, at the county levels, we prepare county plans, and at the city level, we prepare three types of plans: the city comprehensive plan, then city detailed plans, which is prepared after city comprehensive plans, and city revitalization plans, which is a special type of plans are prepared for dilapidated urban areas of certain cities that have this type of areas. Now, the traditional master planning approach, which is taken place in Iran, also takes place in many other developing countries. I have seen in African cities also they do this conventional procedural approach of adapting survey, analysis, plan, and implementation scheme. This is the same in Iran, but this approach, which utilizes text and maps and provides a framework for guiding urban development over a 10 years period. This is the time horizon for our comprehensive master plans. They have been criticized because of being too rigid, expensive to prepare, complex, static, and also they are unable to achieve urban sustainability. So to give you an example, this is urban resilience study which I have done in Tehran metropolis at the neighborhoods level. Now you see the more resilient neighborhoods are in the northern parts of the city, scattered at the northern parts of the city. And the next slide is done by JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agency, and they show the damage or collapse of buildings should one of the active faults in Tehran metropolis, that is ray fault, gets activated. So how many buildings would collapse as a result of this earthquake? And you see the red ones, there are those areas that about 90 to 100% of the buildings would collapse. As the color becomes yellowish, then the number of or percent of neighborhoods with percent of collapsed buildings becomes less. So you see in the northern parts, which are blue, the number of buildings that might collapse becomes very rare. Now I put these two figures beside one another. Although in the preparation of the plan, the resilience and also for the this damage that you see for the buildings, land use and urban planning related factors were the most important drivers for the preparation of these two plans, both for resilience and the vulnerability. I could deduct or deduce two issues here. One is that those areas that are highly resilient are highly also less vulnerable. The more vulnerable areas of the city are less resilient. So is the current urban planning situation, or could the current urban planning situation take this issue into account? The answer is no, because we have a very fixed terms of references for preparing master plans. And so we seldom get into these issues of resilience and so on. So another issue is that urban planning is very important in and they're also the factors very important in preparation of both these plans. Now, if the land use or the decayed urban areas, which are urban planning related factors, have played an important role in the preparation of these two plans. So they all mention or stress the importance of urban planning. The question that arises is what should we do? I have put an issue, a recommendation that we should move towards a resilience-based urban planning transformation. What do we mean by resilience-based urban planning transformation? The issue incorporates three items together: governance, planning, and resilience. Now, for these three parts, I have put some recommendations. The first one being revising the existing spatial urban planning legislation. You see, I'm talking about Iran. Our current legal foundations for urban planning is very outdated. We have two legal bases for our urban planning. One is the law of creating High Council for Urban Planning and Architecture, and the other is the law of changing the title of Ministry of Housing and Development to Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. Both of them date back to 1970s. The first one being approved in 1973 and the second in 1974. Now, after that, although we have had some laws that partially cover some of the urban planning issues, but they were not comprehensive in nature. And fundamentally, we have these two laws that date back to about 50 years. And now we can't govern our cities with these legal issues that have been approved 50 years ago. The situation in 50 years ago is totally different than now. So what we should do is to revise the existing spatial urban planning legislation to make them conducive to the current situation. The second thing that we should do is move towards preparation of strategic futuristic plans. You see, in the traditional comprehensive planning or master planning experience that we have in the country, they plan for predictable future, which is insufficient, and in some ways they are destructive because we can't predict the future. Now, there is a need for transition in urban planning and governance, which enables cities to navigate change, build capacity to withstand shocks, and locate sources of experimentation and innovation in the face of uncertainties. So if we want to take uncertainties into account, we have to go into futuristic strategic planning, wherein scenarios are put forward, and then this type of planning would be conducive for the situation that we have. The third issue is moving towards inclusive urban planning. These two items are of urban governance in nature. What do I mean by inclusive urban planning? Current urban planning practices in Iran, we do not involve people in either plan preparation or in plan ratification, in plan implementation. So, in fact, urban professionals prepare plans without the participation of the stakeholders. So an inclusive urban planning framework should guarantee equal and considerable attention in planning to all stakeholders, particularly the weaker and vulnerable residents, the poor, the aged, the disabled, and the children. And general attention and focus on all critical sectors of urban setting also should be taken into account, such as economic, social, environment, institutional, and so on. And finally, moving towards a decentralized urban planning. You see the outdated legal planning system that I mentioned calls the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which is now named to Ministry of Road and Urban Development, to be in charge of preparing comprehensive or master plans for the entire cities of the country. Now, decentralization means that local authorities should be given the power to prepare their own development plans, to examine them, to approve them, to implement them, to evaluate them, and to monitor them. So in this way, we have moved towards decentralized urban planning, and this would end up in what I have put forward as the incorporation of the urban governance, planning, and resilience. So at the core of this incorporation lies the transformative resilience, which guides the preparation of the plan towards a resilient cities through the four components, which I have borrowed it from the paper that we have jointly prepared by Dr. Asadzadeh and some of our German colleagues. Participation and inclusiveness, flexibility and decentralization, innovations and novelties, orchestration and leadership. And I think that these could somehow help us incorporate urban governance and planning and resilience and move towards making our cities more resilient. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Zebardast, for the great presentation. Very insightful, very enjoyable, to be honest, from the theory of resilience to the practice of planning and needed information for our discussion. You know, today I have two roles, moderator and also discussant. And I was looking in Google, what is the role of discussant? And I found that I have to contribute to the topic and make it, I think, I am sure that most of people here know about these topics, resilience, urban planning. What I would add is like to some more facts to the topic, because as Professor Zebardast mentioned, we are working and we already worked and published some joint papers on the topic. And Professor Zebardast, you mentioned two important things, at least I noted. First, I would say unprecedented coherence on resilience and urban planning. And yes, okay. Coherence on resilience and urban planning. And this is very important, because we heard about resilience. It is a very hot topic and on agendas, policy agendas, and also in the international and national levels, you gave some examples, and also in planning. The role of planning to enhance and build resilience, and also on the other side, how planning can contribute to resilience, and resilience contributes to urban planning. And also, I think in the literature also you mentioned some examples, the dominant paradigms or mechanisms of urban planning in the world. I think in the literature we see somehow mostly we see most of the world, in mostly developing countries, undeveloped countries, that you mentioned conservative or traditional paradigm of plannings, so-called comprehensive urban planning, detailed plans, and etc., with different names, different contextualization, and also we had collaborative urban planning. Also, people in literature, I saw that so-called strategic planning. But interestingly, we expected for criticizing the role of or the contribution of traditional or comprehensive planning to resilience, and most of resilient scholars criticize that this kind of old-fashioned, old systems of planning cannot contribute to resilience. But the interesting is also for the collaborative planning. that was the most dominant and in developed countries. And also in the literature, we see that scholars argue that this kind of collaborative planning also insufficient for building resilient to natural disasters, as you mentioned, climate change, also unsustainable development trajectories. And for example, one example I heard or I saw in the literature that argue that collaborative planning or strategic planning focuses mostly on processes and ignores the outcome. This is also highlighting the role of social networks to somehow neglect the importance of technician or professional groups whose ideas, knowledge, expertise shape urban planning. But also we hear that resilient urban planning as a third domain is still ongoing. And but to be honest, I think also in the literature we see that literature scholars argue that we need definitely more contexts, more concepts, more experimentation for building or having or calling resilient urban planning. But at the same time, we have, interestingly, also we see some kind of similarities between resilience concept and planning. As you presented, in resilience, we have three dominant conceptions or capacities: short-term absorptive, medium-term incremental adaptive, and long-term transformative resilience. In urban planning also we have some kind of this. For example, as if I'm not mistaken, this so-called traditional urban planning is mostly long-term oriented. If we think on this comprehensive planning is more than I think 15 and somehow 20 years in long term. But on the other hand, this collaborative planning is short oriented and short term and mostly 5 years. But in resilient planning, we have both. I would say that this kind of coherence, also relationships we see between the concepts and processes of both resilience planning. And the question is how we can make our planning and governance system more resilient. You presented nicely ongoing challenges and debates in the literature, and also I think you concluded with making a transition in planning is existing planning system. I think the most important questions is, for example, you gave an example of community resilience and different kind of concepts of frameworks for resilience from Miro and this brick model from Susan Cutter's. But I think one important gaps in the literature, following your arguments, the need for transition in existing planning system. What is needed, or what is the highlighted gap, is the absence of very famous or well-known conceptual framework. Because as I follow the conception or the conceptual framework of Miro, it is on urban systems, or the conceptual frame developed by Susan Cutters that drop or brick is on community resilience. I'm talking about the scales. But here the focus that this panel is on urban planning. My question is like that: do you see this kind of necessity for having a solid conceptual framework for what? For analyzing, understanding, or measuring the resilience of urban planning or governance? It was a question, Professor Zebardast.
Yes, thank you very much, Asad. As you mentioned, the framework that Susan Cutter has put forward is for multi-hazard resilience assessment. So it is a general type of framework in nature. And I chose it because I think that all the issues and components that take place in an urban setting is somehow covered by that framework, but not necessarily 100%. So if one wants to accommodate it into urban planning system, I think there should be some studies or case studies to see in certain urban settings what are the areas that are left behind and should be included. And since that the BRIC model is proposed for urban resilience or community resilience, now we are talking about community planning, which encompasses issues more than resilience alone. So then I think we could come up with the gaps that may be present and perhaps put forward some models that would fulfill these gaps. I think the foundation is there. We have enough materials, enough models for both issues, but as you mentioned, they are both prepared for different settings. Now, if we want to go about resilience of urban planning or incorporating urban planning and resilience together, we have to work a little bit on models that would have important issues from both sides taken into consideration.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Zebardast. Also, following another topics that you highlighted and presented, I think it was the resilience level of urban resilience level in Tehran. I think urban districts, if I'm not mistaken, and you linked it to the function of governance, existing governance and planning. I think you mentioned that the most important drivers of both vulnerability and resilience is urban planning oriented factors or indicators or dimensions. And if it is it like this conclusion we can conclude that this is mostly relevant to dominant master plans or details plan that we have? I'm talking about because again, you mentioned that resilience is context dependent. If this is the level of resilience, existing level of resilience in Tehran, and we argue that contribution of existing planning system, my question is, how do you see the impacts of existing plannings on existing level of resilience in Tehran?
I think the resilience could be taken from the highest level of planning. In fact, when I was in charge of preparing a spatial plan for Tehran province, and we had a standard terms of references prepared by the Plan and Budget Organization that we had to follow, and they had 10 items included there. And we added 2 items to those 10. One of them was regional resilience, because I thought that regional resilience is of utmost importance, without which the spatial plan of a province couldn't survive. So we took the issue and we covered it in the plan. And it was interesting that one of the priority strategies that we came up with was in the area of regional resilience. So what I think is that resilience should be taken from the highest level of planning system, even from the national. I'm afraid to say supranational. Even if, say, for example, in terms of European Union, you have ESDP, European Spatial Development Perspective, which covers the entire European Union.
Yes.
I think we don't have such a system, but I think in the ESDP, the resilience should be at that scale, should be taken into account, and recommendations be given to the nations to do their plans in accordance with that strategy or that perspective. So I personally think that we should see the issue from the national level. So resilience should be given an utmost importance at the national policy level, then to the regional, and then when it comes to the local levels, then you could, considering the nature or the context of these regions, which type of disasters should be given priority, or in which areas of those provinces, and when these are earmarked, then the master plans or comprehensive plans or details plans should take them into consideration. How could they operationalize those issues in their local plans?
I think this argument that you kindly presented, Professor Zebardast, is lined with this 4 dimension also you mentioned. You are talking about this the different scale of resilience. I think you are not talking about that hierarchy. I think these scales you are talking, yes. And also you presented one important thing is leadership. I think here is the things that existing resilience paradigm that should also focus on coordination and leadership, also so-called coordination, orchestration, and this kind of things. And interestingly, this also is a gap in the developed countries. If you remember, we compared Rhine-Ruhr metropolitan region with Tehran metropolitan region, 2 different contexts from the development pathways, from the planning, governance system, structure, practices, and tools. But and the capacities, the type of capacity that we focused in this paper and with you and other colleagues, German-Iranian colleagues, was transformative. And also in the Rhine-Ruhr metropolitan region that I am also based on that, we saw that the absence of some important criteria for transformative resilience, including coordination. Because, this is, I think, the basic that also in the international agendas in 2016 is not so old. In 2016, the new urban agenda highlights and acknowledges the vital need for rethinking, as you mentioned, on existing planning, not only in developing and undeveloped countries, but also in developed countries as well. I agree with this argument that resilience should be decentralized, also somehow centralized, not from the actors, but I think that having some kind of leadership functionality that should manage, finalize, and also moderate different kind of interests. And sometimes these kind of interests are conflict interests. Resilience of one organization, actors, or stakeholders could be vulnerability of others, or not interested for others. In this situation, I think definitely we need some kind of leadership, and again, this kind of leadership maybe in developed countries decentralized. But in centralized countries like Iran, I don't know, and I'm not sure how this kind of leadership could be. How should it work, Professor Zebardast? Leadership means, like, as we assume, that comes from the hierarchy, from top down, or different kind of leadership we should think on that, or form or frame on that.
Well, one of the issues that is important is the political will. Whether there is a political will to undertake this issue. Say, for example, the issue of revising the legal foundations for urban planning, as I mentioned. So our 2 laws that are fundamental for urban planning are approved in the 1970s. So whether there is a political will to revise them or not is very important. Say, for example, as an academician, I may wish to revise them. But what about the Minister of Urban Development, Housing and Urban Development? Does he believe that these 2 outdated laws are no longer helpful. So this is an issue that we have raised it many times, and many initiatives towards preparing comprehensive urban planning law have been put forward, but in the past at least 20 years we have not been successful because there was no political will to change them or to revise them. So as you mentioned, this the issue of leadership, as I link it to urban planning, is very important. Whether those who are in charge of steering the urban planning issue, whether they are willing to move towards these revisions or these changes that falls in the transformative nature of resilience. This is long term, and this needs change, and and also the change is also fundamental. So these are issues that we have put forward, hoping that God willing, there would be someone listening to us and perhaps moving towards these steps that we put forward.
Well, hopingfully is the best, keeping our hopingfully for the future. I just see here a question from Professor Alaouddini, and the question is like that. There has been a talk or a demand, I think, conversation or discussion for making some reformation or adjustment on existing urban master plan, more general level. And the question, if I'm not mistaken, is why this kind of adjustments or reformation did not happen, and is it because of no political will, also like administrating or bureaucratic thing that we know or we see in the planning system? I'm here, I think this is Iran. What do you think, Professor Zebardast?
Well, I think there were two initiatives taken in the past. One came up with a concrete proposal, but was not approved by the community, urban planning community, because we thought that the proposal was not helping for the betterment of the existing legal or laws. The other issue is that I think because these types of revisions are time consuming, and so the ministers, they won't go beyond, they won't go after them, because they think that by the time they finish the job, their terms of their terms in office would end. So what is the benefit for them? So so I think this is the issue. We need someone to think about the country rather than to himself. That to make these revisions, although time consuming, started somewhere.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. Just for those are interested to set question, please write your question in message public chat. I will read and try to share with Professor Zebardast, and if I could to answer or cover it, please write down your questions. Professor Zebardast, one idea about this, you were talking about the transformation of existing planning system. And to do so, I think, like resilience, you know, when back into first ideas or conception of resilience, or also the biggest motivation for the development of resilience measurement framework was to evaluate, to quantify, to assess where we are. I mean, we here community, if there is a brick, or cities, if we are talking from the mirrors paper or mirrors approach. And here, if we are talking from our condition as planning or existing governance and planning system, I think to drive this transformation or to drive this transition toward transformative resilience, again, we need some kind of steps or I would say, processes or procedures, like having first building a context for transformative resilience. And I think it is very important. We should know, or we should analyze what is urban governance and planning system, because you kindly presented some basic domains from Miros, but it was also about the urban systems, not urban planning. I think the next steps on this area that also we are focusing, I think we in the Increase project, we are focusing on that, is like also we should first focus on building context for transformative urban resilience and the development of what we should do. And also it links to your question that this 5 W's of Sarah Miros, and also she mentions as a trades-off what resilience of what. If we focus on urban planning resilience, what should be considered for analyzing resilience? And then definitely we need new concepts or conceptualization. If we are we consider like that, we should, because existing or old version of resilience, I think this transformative resilience that you also presented is a more new one, more recent one. And also mostly we see transformative resilience in the literature after 2015 SDGs, also transforming our future. The title was like that. And I think we don't have a lot of literature or theoretical foundation on transformative resilience, not only on urban planning and governance, also on cities, communities, different scales. And also, I definitely am a fan of like making operationalization of transformative resilience of urban planning. You know, if we would argue, and if we go, if we talk about transforming our planning system, and we start from 2022, definitely we need some kind of operationalizing framework, measurement framework to understand where the existing planning system stand up. Which dimensions, which factors, which aspects contributes or constrain transformative resilience. And yeah, these are ideas. I think definitely we will talk on Increase. We are waiting you in Germany next 2 months. But I would also hear you some words about this kind of contextualizing, yes, conceptualizing of transformative resilience for urban planning.
Well, you are right. As we saw that the 3 types of capacity that we talked about. So when Susan Carter talks about the inherent capacity, or then she comes up with her own classification of bottom-up and top-down approaches, which she calls them qualitative and quantitative approaches for capacity assessment of this type of capacity, which usually some authors think that coping capacity is before the event occurs, or the bounce back. For the transformative, they think that this is bouncing forward. So bouncing forward is very difficult because we don't know the future. So that is why I put forward scenario planning, because we have to come up with scenarios that what might happen, and try to get the common things of among those scenarios. Say, for example, I remember in 1970s at the National Spatial Plan that was prepared by the French Tehran company for Iran, they had come up with 2 scenarios. If development happens in the east side of the country, then what is the transportation network that is needed? Then the other scenario was exactly opposite. If the development takes place in the right part of the country, what is the needed transportation system that should respond to that scenario. When they overlaid these two transportation networks required for the two opposite scenarios, 85% of them were common. So whether you go to the right, to the west, or to the left, 85% of the transportation is needed. So when I say that we should go towards scenario-based planning, we should come up with opposing or possible scenarios and try to operationalize them and overlay them to see what is in common. And try to operationalize those that are in common. And well, planning is a dynamic process. It is not static. We should revise all these issues every 5 years to see what is happening, whether those scenarios that we envisaged, whether they happened or not, and what might be happening in the next. So we should keep on revising our scenarios, our studies, and this is how we could perhaps move towards operationalization of the transformative thinking in resilience.
Thank you very much. I would sum up with this, very important that joint understanding of future uncertainties and complexities, I think very important for building doesn't matter, mostly for transformative, but also for this incremental adaptive resilience also important. And I see no further questions. And yeah, Professor Zebardast, if you have final words for this topic, and maybe short, you kindly sum up with your presentation.
I would like to first thank the organizer, again, thank the organizers. These discussions are needed because we have to contribute to the resilient-based urban planning. Now, whether it is going to happen through this type of discussions or through some research or common research that may take place, I think these are very important to get feedback from our colleagues over there and others, and try to see how we could make the planet a good place to live.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, for your contribution, Professor Zebardast, and also, as you mentioned, I am also happy that we have you with this great experience in urban planning and resilience in the project in Germany Union projects. And again, thank you very much for the contribution and your opportunity availability for summertime, vacation time. And also I would thank the organization team for helping us, dear Sven, Mahmoud, and also other background people we don't see, but we got a great support of them to organizing this panel. And I would no further question. It was also thank you, some kind of thanks. Thank you all for audience to hearing us, and hope to see you all. Thank you again, and I wish all the best for all of you.